Welcome to the second video in my Sons of the Dragon series on Aegon the Conqueror's two sons who also became kings, Aenys and Maegor. Part 1 was all about Aenys and gave the backstory to Aenys and Maegor's childhood, so make sure to watch that video as well to get the full picture of Maegor's life. This video, Part 2, will pick up where we left off in Part 1, with the death of King Aenys I Targaryen. Maegor is often brought up as an example of what not to do if you find yourself sitting on the Iron Throne. He was a screw-up just like his older brother Aenys, but a different kind of screw-up. Aenys was weak, indecisive, and lacked the true fire expected of a Targaryen dragonlord. Maegor had all the fire and strength of a great king, but none of the even-handedness or diplomacy required of a good ruler. Maegor the Cruel certainly earned his moniker. He was a violent, destructive, impatient, cruel monarch. But was he insane, like the Mad King? Or was he just evil, like the Rogue Prince? Let's find out. Notably absent from King Aenys' funeral was Dowager Queen Visenya, who had left Aenys' bedside as soon as he died. She immediately mounted Vhagar and flew across the Narrow Sea to Pentos, and brought her son Prince Maegor out of exile. The realm needed a new king. Naturally, that new king should be Aenys' son and heir, Aegon, who was sheltering with Rhaena in the Westerlands, surrounded by angry mobs and poor fellows. Visenya did not care for Westerosi custom. She thought Maegor should have been king over Aenys in the first place, despite being the younger son. 5 years later, she still thinks the throne belongs to Maegor. Maegor landed on Dragonstone, and Visenya crowned him with the iron and ruby crown of the Conqueror. All the lords and knights present knelt before him, and hailed him as Maegor of the House Targaryen, first of his name. Gradmaester Garwin was the only man to object, claiming that according to Aegon the Conqueror's own laws, Aenys' son Aegon should succeed him. Maegor had a different inheritance policy. The Iron Throne will go to the man who has the strength to seize it, he replied. He then unsheathed Blackfire and took off the maester's head in one swing, offering a preview for how he meant to deal with traitors. The next day, Maegor on Balerion and Visenya on Vhagar descended on the city of King's Landing. Citizens began to flee in panic, though the warrior sons had barred the gates. Maegor raised his dragon banner atop Visenya's hill to stand against a faith militant on the hill of Rhaenys. Thousands flocked to Maegor, and Visenya proclaimed Maegor a true king, blood of Aegon the Conqueror, who was my brother, my husband, and my love. If any man questions my son's right to the Iron Throne, let him prove his claim with his body. The warrior sons answered Visenya's call. 700 knights in silver armor met King Maegor on Visenya's hill. Maegor laid the terms. He said, "Let us not bandy words. Swords will decide this matter." The captain of the warrior sons, Sir Daemon Morgan, said, "Let each side have 7 champions, as it was done in Andalos of old. Can you find 6 men to stand beside you?" Aenys had taken the Kingsguard to Dragonstone before he died. Maegor stood alone. He turned to the crowd and called, "Who will come and stand beside his king?" At first, only a simple man-at-arms, not even a knight, named Dick Bean, stepped forward. Dick Bean said, "I've been a king's man since I was a boy. I mean to die a king's man." His bravery inspired the others. Bernard Brune, the man who killed Red Heron, stepped forward. Maegor chose 4 others: Sir Bram of Blackhall, a hedge knight, Sir Rayford Rosby, Sir Guy Lothston, called Guy the Glutton, and Sir Lucifer Massey, Lord of Stonedance. The names of the 7 knights who fought on the side of the faith were Sir Daemon Morgan, called Daemon the Devout, the Grand Captain of the Warrior Sons, Sir Lyle Bracken, Sir Harris Horp, called Death's Head Harry, Sir Aegon Ambrose, Sir Dickon Flowers, the Bastard of Beesbury, Sir William the Wanderer, and Sir Garibald of the 7 Stars, the Septon Knight. Queen Dowager Visenya gave the command to begin. Dick Bean died first, which might be the most predictable thing George R. Martin has ever written. In the end, King Maegor stood alone against Daemon the Devout and William the Wanderer. Blackfire in his hand, Maegor slew both of them, but as he fell, Sir William dealt Maegor a nasty blow to the side of his head that cracked his helm and left Maegor unconscious. People thought he was dead until his mother Visenya took off his helm. "The king breathes," Visenya said. "The king lives." The victory was Maegor's, and his reign had thus begun. Maegor was carried off to be seen by maesters, while the hundreds of remaining warrior sons knelt to Dowager Queen Visenya. For the next 27 days, Maegor lingered on death's door. Across the Blackwater on Driftmark, Dowager Queen Alyssa Balerion, Aenys' wife, proclaimed her son Aegon as the true king, but few heard her call. The young prince remained at Crakehall half a realm away, trapped in a castle surrounded by poor fellows and pious peasants, most of whom considered him an abomination. Thousands of poor fellows began to march towards King's Landing on behalf of the faith, to oppose King Maegor. Those from the west followed the hedge knight Horace Hill, and those from the south followed a gigantic axeman called Wat the Hewer. The zealots outside Crakehall left as well, so Aegon and Rhaena made it safely to Casterly Rock, where Lady Jocasta Lannister realized that Rhaena was pregnant. On the 28th day after the Trial of Seven, a ship arrived from Pentos carrying 2 women and 600 sellswords. Alice Harroway, Maegor's second wife, had returned to Westeros, but not alone. With her sailed another woman, a pale, raven-haired beauty known only as Tyanna of the Tower. Some said she was Maegor's concubine. Others named her Lady Alice's paramour. Tyanna was the bastard daughter of a Pentoshi magister. She was rumored to be a poisoner and sorceress as well. As soon as she arrived, Dowager Queen Visenya dismissed her son's maesters and gave Maegor over to Tyanna's care. And the very next morning, King Maegor awoke from his month-long coma and stood on the battlements of the Red Keep between Alice and Tyanna, while the crowd of King's Landing cheered wildly in celebration. Those cheers soon faded, because the first thing Maegor did after waking up was mount Balerion, fly to the Hill of Rhaenys, where the remaining 700 knights of the warrior sons were praying, and Maegor burned the Sept of Remembrance to the ground. It was said the screams of the burning men could be heard throughout the city, and plumes of smoke lingered over King's Landing for days. However, this is just the beginning of King Maegor's war against the faith militant, and it would last the entirety of his reign. Maegor commanded all loyal lords to take up arms in their fields and rid the land of the ragged hordes of poorfellows. In response, the High Septon called upon true and pious children of the gods to take up arms in defense of the faith, and put an end to the reign of dragons and monsters and abominations. The first battle of this war between the faith and the Targaryens was in the Reach, at Stonebridge. 9,000 poor fellows, under the command of Wat the Hewer, attempted to cross the river Mander, but were caught between the well-trained loyalist knights to the north and south of the river. The slaughter was so brutal that the Mander ran red with blood for 20 leagues. Soon after, an army of the faith numbering 20,000 men battled King Maegor's own host at the fork of the Blackwater. Maegor had more knights on horseback and more dragons. The battle lasted into the night, and rain began to fall, obscuring Balerion's flames. But amidst the smoke and screams and rainfall, King Maegor descended again and again to serve his foes with flame. Maegor won, and when he returned to the Red Keep, Wat the Hewer was brought before him in chains. Maegor sliced off each of his limbs, but forced the maesters to keep him alive so that Wat the Hewer could attend Maegor's next wedding. King Maegor announced his intention to take a third wife, Tyanna of the Tower. Only Grand Maester Myros dared speak against it, saying, "Your one true wife awaits you in the High Tower." So Maegor heard him out, descended the Iron Throne, and slew him where he stood with Blackfire. Then Maegor wed Tyanna on the Hill of Rhaenys, on top of the ashes and rubble and bones from the Sept of Remembrance. It was said that Maegor had to put a dozen Septons to death before he found one willing to perform the ceremony. Wat the Hewer, limbless, was kept alive to witness the marriage. By this time, Visenya had flown to Driftmark and convinced Dowager Queen Alyssa, Aenys' widow, to pledge fealty to King Maegor. So Alyssa and her children, Viserys, Jaehaerys, and Alysanne, were all in attendance at Maegor and Tyanna's wedding. Across the realm in Casterly Rock, Aegon and his sister wife Rhaena were defiant. Even though the knights who were with them had fled to bend the knee to Maegor, Lord Lyman Lannister refused to send Aegon and Rhaena back to King's Landing, even when Maegor demanded he do so. Much of the realm hated Aegon, saying that he was weak like his father Aenys, since Maegor rode Balerion the Black Dread, and his sister rode Dreamfire, but Aegon himself was dragonless. And when Alyssa Valerion attended Maegor's wedding, it seemed that even Aegon's own mother had given up on him. At Casterly Rock, Rhaena gave birth to twin daughters, Aeria and Rhaella, and the High Septon said they too were abominations. Rhaena begged Aegon to take her and the babies across a narrow sea to Essos, saying that, "I would gladly give up my own life to make you king, but I will not put our girls at risk." Aegon the Uncrowned, however, was determined to claim his birthright. In the Red Keep, Maegor personally oversaw the expansion of the castle, later known as Maegor's Holdfast. It was said that Maegor may rule the Seven Kingdoms, but he himself was ruled by the three queens, his mother Visenya, his paramour Alice Harroway, and the witch Tyenna, the mistress of whisperers, who spoke with rats and spiders, it was said, and all the vermin of King's Landing came to her by night to tell tales of any fool who dared to speak against the king. Thousands of poor fellows still haunted the roads of Westeros, though they'd never join in large enough numbers to face King Maegor in the field again. But the warrior sons chose a new captain, Sir Joffrey Doggett, who gained 2,000 soldiers. Maegor demanded lords come to King's Landing and pledge fealty, and the High Septon was commanded to deliver himself to the Red Keep to stand trial for high treason. In response, the High Septon commanded Maegor to present himself in Oldtown to beg the forgiveness of the gods for his sins and cruelties. King Maegor let the poison in the realm fester while he oversaw the construction of the Red Keep. But Visenya chose to mount Vhagar and bring fire and blood to the Riverlands as she once did to Dorne. In a single night, the seats of houses Blaintree, Terrick, Deadings, Leicester, and Wayne were set aflame. Then Maegor himself took wing, flying Balerion to the Westerlands, where he burned the castles of the Brooms, the Falwells, the Lorches, and the other pious lords who had defied his summons. Lastly, he descended upon the seat of House Doggett, reducing it to ash and killing Sir Joffrey Doggett's family. As pillars of smoke rose all through the Westerlands and the Riverlands, Vhagar and Balerion turned south. Now it seemed as if the greatest and most populous city in Westeros, Oldtown, must surely burn. Thousands fled Oldtown that night. Thousands more took to the streets in a night of drunken revelry. "This is a night for song and sin and drink," men told one another, "for come the morrow, the virtuous and the vile burn together." Maegor and Balerion would bring ruin to Oldtown. The High Septon called down the wrath of the gods upon the Targaryens. The archmasters of the Citadel met in conclave. The men of the City Watch filled sacks with sand and pails with water to fight the fires they knew were coming. Along the city walls, crossbows and scorpions were hoisted onto the battlements in hopes of bringing down the dragons when they appeared. Atop the high tower, the great beacon fire turned a baleful green as Lord Martin Hightower called his banners. Oldtown waited for the dawn and the coming of the dragons. And the dragons came. Vhagar first, as the sun was rising, then Balerion, just before midday. But they found the gates of the city open, and the banners of House Targaryen, House Tyrell, and House Hightower flying side by side atop the city walls. Visenya was the first to learn the news. Sometime during the night, the High Septon had died. Some say that his High Holiness took his own life, either because he was afraid of Maegor and the dragons, or in order to sacrifice himself to save the city from burning. Others claim the Seven struck him down for the sin of pride, treason, and arrogance. But most people believed the High Septon was murdered, whether by the maesters of the Citadel, the Hightowers, or even Lord Hightower's aunt, who was said to be a witch. The truth was never known, but it is known that Lord Martin Hightower arrested all the warrior sons in Oldtown, his own brother amongst them. He opened the city gates and raised the Targaryen dragon banners above his walls. King Maegor remained in Oldtown for almost half a year, holding court and presiding over trials. He gave a choice to the captured warrior sons. Those who renounced their allegiance to the faith would be permitted to join the Night's Watch. Those who refused could be executed. 3/4 of them chose to take the black. The remainder died. 7 of them, famous knights and the sons of lords, were given the honor of having King Maegor himself behead them with blackfire. The rest were beheaded by their own former brothers-in-arms. The new elderly and feeble High Septon formally dissolved both the warrior sons and the poor fellows, commanding the remaining members to lay down their arms in the name of the gods. The 7 had no more need of warriors, proclaimed the new High Septon. Henceforth, the Iron Throne would protect and defend the faith. During his time at Oldtown, Maegor was also reconciled with his first wife, Queen Cerys Hightower. She agreed to accept the king's 2 other wives, while Maegor agreed to restore to Cerys all the rights, incomes, and privileges due to her as his wedded wife and queen. By the end of Maegor's stay in Old Town, late in the year 43 AC, his nephew Prince Aegon the Uncrowned finally pushed his claim. With Maegor gone for so long from King's Landing, Aegon and Rhaena raced across the Riverlands and entered the capital hidden beneath sacks of corn. With so few followers, Aegon dared not seat himself upon the Iron Throne, since he knew he couldn't hold it. Instead, they were there for the dragons. Rhaena went to Dreamfire, and Aegon went to Quicksilver, his father's dragon, to bond with him. They were aided by friends in Maegor's own court who had grown weary of the king's cruelties. The prince and princess entered King's Landing in a wagon pulled by mules, but when they made their departure, it was on dragonback, flying side by side. They flew back to the Westerlands to assemble an army. Aegon Targaryen, mounted on Quicksilver, descended from the sky to denounce his uncle as a tyrant and usurper, and call upon all honest men to rally to his banners. Soon enough, 15,000 joined Aegon's cause. They mostly came from the Westerlands and the Riverlands, which had just been thoroughly burned by Maegor and Visenya. The cunning Lord Lannister of Casterly Rock lent 500 soldiers to Aegon under the command of his bastard brother, Tyler Hill, while keeping his own hands clean should Maegor prevail. No great lords had rallied to Prince Aegon's cause, but Queen Tyenna, Mistress of Whispers, wrote to warn Maegor that Storm's End, the Eyrie, Winterfell, and Casterly Rock had all been in secret communication with Aenys' widow, Alyssa Balerion. Before declaring for Aegon, these great lords wished to be convinced he might prevail. Aegon required a victory, and Maegor denied him that. Lord Harroway of Harrenhal, Lord Tully of Riverrun, and 5,000 soldiers under the command of Sir Davos Starkland of the Kingsguard all marched west to meet Aegon. Up from the Reach came Lords Peake, Merryweather, and Caswell. Aegon faced resistance from all sides. Lord Corbray advised Aegon to engage each foe separately before they could join their powers, but Aegon didn't want to divide his strength. Instead, he chose to march on toward King's Landing. Just south of the God's Eye, he found Sir Davos Starkland's army, as Lords Merryweather and Caswell were advancing from the south, and Lords Tully and Harroway from the north. Prince Aegon commanded a charge, hoping to break through the Kingslanders before the other loyalists fell upon his flanks. Aegon mounted Quicksilver to lead the attack himself. But as soon as he ascended into the air, Balerion the Black Dread appeared in the southern sky. King Maegor had come to kill his nephew. For the first time since the doom of Valyria, dragon contended with dragon in the sky. Quicksilver, a quarter of the size of Balerion, was no match for the older, fiercer dragon. Then the Black Dread fell upon her from above, his jaws closing round her neck as he ripped one wing from her body. Screaming and smoking, Quicksilver plunged to the earth, and Prince Aegon with her. Rhaena remained at Pink Maiden Castle with her daughters when Aegon marched, but since Dreamfire was smaller and younger than Quicksilver was, it's unlikely she would have made a difference against Maegor and Balerion. Rhaena fled to Fair Isle, off the coast of Casterly Rock, being protected by House Farman. For the best part of a year, the people of Fair Isle watched the east in dread, fearing the sight of Balerion's dark wings. But Maegor never came. Instead, he returned to the Red Keep, where he was determined to get himself an heir. In 44 AC, King Maegor sat grimly on the Iron Throne, while the Red Keep was raised around him. Each night he took one of his 3 wives into his bed, but he had no luck in getting one of them pregnant. On Dragonstone, Visenya kept Alyssa Balerion and her children Jaehaerys and Alysanne as hostages, while the elder son, Viserys, was sent to King's Landing to squire for King Maegor. Soon after, Alyce Harroway announced she was with child, but after 3 moon turns, she had a tragic stillbirth. The boy was a monster, with twisted limbs, a huge head, and no eyes. "This cannot be my son," Maegor roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury, and he ordered the immediate execution of the midwives, septas, and maesters who attended Queen Alyce. It is said that Maegor was seated on the Iron Throne with the Grand Maester's decapitated head in his hands when his other wife, Tyenna, came to see him. Tyenna told Maegor that he had been deceived. that Queen Alis was so desperate to give Maegor a child that her father and Hand of the King, Lord Lucas Harroway, sent other men into Alis's chambers on the nights Maegor spent with Cerys or Tyenna. Every man on the list Tyenna gave to Maegor had one thing in common. They were all proven to be able to father healthy children. Under torture, all but 2 of the men confessed to sleeping with Queen Alis. Maegor sent the Kingsguard to drag Alis Harroway from her chambers, and killed her sisters in front of her. Lord Lucas Harroway was flung from the roof of the Tower of the Hand, and then Maegor took every son, brother, and nephew of House Harroway and threw them onto the spikes beneath Maegor's holdfast. The worst death belonged to Queen Alis, who Maegor gave to Tyenna to torture. Alis took a fortnight to die, and Maegor was present for all of it, a witness to her agony. After her death, Alis was cut into 7 parts, which were mounted on spikes above the 7 gates of the city, where they remained until they rotted. Then, Maegor marched on Harrenhal. He entered the castle and killed every single person with a drop of Harroway blood. After the extermination of House Harroway, Maegor held a grand melee, and whoever won would become the new Lord of Harrenhal. The winner was Sir Walton Towers. When Maegor returned at last to the Red Keep, more troubling news awaited him. His mother Visenya had died on Dragonstone, and in the night, Dowager Queen Alyssa escaped the island with Jaehaerys and Alysanne, taking Dark Sister and 2 dragons, Vermithor and Silverwing, with them. Maegor had his mother Visenya burned, and her ashes laid to rest next to Aegon the Conqueror, her husband. Maegor still held Alyssa and Aenys' son, Viserys, as his squire. Queen Tyenna tortured him for 9 days about where his mother and siblings went, but he did not know. Viserys' body was left out in the open of the Red Keep for a fortnight, and Maegor said, let his mother come and claim him, but Alyssa never did. Viserys was 15 years old when he was killed, and had been loved by the small folk and lords alike. The realm wept for him. In 45 AC, the construction of the Red Keep was at an end. Maegor celebrated by throwing a feast for all the builders and architects. 3 days later, Maegor had them all executed so that they wouldn't be able to spread the knowledge of the castle's secret passageways and entrances. Not long after, Queen Cerys fell ill and died. Maegor was left with but a single queen, the black-haired and black-hearted Tyenna, mistress of the spiders, who was hated and feared by all. Maegor ordered the rubble and bones of the Sept of Remembrance, which he burned several years prior, to be cleared from the Hill of Rhaenys. In its place would be built a great stone stable for dragons, a lair worthy of Balerion, Vhagar, and their hatchlings. It became known as the Dragon Pit. Late in 45 AC, the tides began to turn against Maegor. He continued his war against the Faith Militant, hunting down a group of poor fellows led by a woman named Poxy Jane Poor. Small folk and lords alike had come to despise Maegor for his many cruelties, and many began to give help and comfort to his enemies. One such enemy was Septon Moon, who had been raised up by the poor fellows against the real High Septon in Oldtown, who they called the High Lickspittle. Septon Moon roamed the Riverlands and the Reach, drawing huge crowds wherever he went, to preach against the king. Additionally, the land north of the Golden Tooth was ruled all but in name by Sir Joffrey Doggett, and Lords Lannister and Tully did not care to move against him. Maegor spent a year racking up kills, and in 46 AC, he returned to the Red Keep with 2,000 skulls, which he laid at the foot of the Iron Throne. Maegor stopped sleeping with Tyenna, and decided he needed to take a new wife if he was going to have an heir. Grand Maester Bennifer suggested Lady Clarissa Dane of Starfall. Lord Butterwell offered his sister, a woman who had already given birth to 7 children, to prove her fertility. Lord Celtigar had 2 young daughters, who were 12 and 13, and he offered either, or both, to the king. Lord Balerion counseled Maegor to send for his niece, Rhaena, on Fair Isle, and marry her. By marrying Rhaena, Maegor could unite their claims, prevent any fresh rebellions from gathering around her, and acquire a hostage against any plots that her mother, Queen Alyssa, might be cooking. Maegor decided he would need a woman of proven fertility, just not Lord Butterwell's daughter. Maegor decided he would take multiple wives, as Lord Celtigar suggested, but neither would be one of his daughters. Maegor decided he would take 3 new wives, and one must surely be his niece Rhaena, as Lord Valerion suggested. On Fair Isle, Rhaena's daughter Arya could be considered the rightful queen of Westeros, since she was the eldest child of Aegon the Uncrowned. But Arya and Rhaella were hardly a year old, and Rhaena dyed their hair to hide the Targaryen silver. Rhaena sent her daughters away, entrusting them to certain unnamed powerful allies, who would see them fostered safely. Rhaena did not even allow herself to know where Arya and Rhaella were being sent, because if she did not know, she could not reveal their location to Maegor under torture. There was no disguising Rhaena, however, whose identity would be revealed by her dragon Dreamfire wherever she went. So Rhaena understood her duty, flew to King's Landing, and met the other two women Maegor had chosen for this triple wedding. Lady Jane Westerling, who had given her late husband a son already, and Lady Eleanor Costain, who had given her husband 3 sons. Maegor had to kill Eleanor's husband, Sir Theo Bolling, on the grounds of conspiring with Alyssa Balerion to crown Aenys' son Jaehaerys. Maegor gave Eleanor the customary 7 days to mourn, and then summoned her to King's Landing. On a warm spring day in 47 AC, Maegor Targaryen took 3 wives in the ward of the Red Keep. Though each of his new queens was garbed and cloaked in the colors of her father's house, the people of King's Landing called them the Black Brides, for all 3 were widows. After the wedding, King Maegor proclaimed Rhaena's daughter Arya as his heir until such time as the gods granted him a son, and sent Arya's twin Rhaella to Oldtown to become a septa. With the same decree, Maegor disinherited Prince Jaehaerys, the last remaining son of King Aenys. Half a year later, both Queen Jane and Queen Eleanor became pregnant, but just like Alice Harroway, Jane Westerling had a stillbirth to a disfigured baby, and she died soon after. Maegor was cursed, men said. He had slain his nephew, made war against the faith and the High Septon, defied the gods, committed murder and incest, adultery and rape. The gods would never grant him a living son. Or so the whispers ran. Maegor himself settled on a different explanation, and sent for Queen Tyanna to be delivered to the dungeons. There, Tyanna made a full confession. She had poisoned Jane Westerling's child in the womb, just as she had Alice Harroway's. It would be the same with Eleanor Costain's baby as well, she promised. It is said that King Maegor slew her himself, cutting out her heart with blackfire and feeding it to his dogs. Tyanna was right, however, as Eleanor Costain had a malformed stillborn boy with no eyes and a hint of dragon wings. That was in 48 AC, the 6th year of King Maegor's reign, and the last year of his life. Everyone in Westeros believed him to be cursed, and his followers melted away. Word reached King's Landing of enemy movement. Sir Joffrey Doggett was being hosted by Lord Tully of Riverrun. Septon Moon marched with thousands of faithful across the Reach to Oldtown, intent on forcing the High Septon to denounce the abomination on the Iron Throne. Lords of the Reach began to join him. Hand of the King Lord Celtigar resigned his position, and Dornishmen began to set up along the Dornish marches, preparing an invasion. The worst blow came from Storm's End. Lord Rhaegar Baratheon revealed that he had been sheltering Queen Alyssa, Prince Jaehaerys, and Princess Alysanne since they fled Dragonstone. Now, Lord Baratheon proclaimed Jaehaerys to be the true and lawful king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, and Prince Jaehaerys named Lord Rhaegar Protector of the Realm and Hand of the King. Queen Alyssa and his sister Alysanne stood beside him as Jaehaerys unsheathed Dark Sister and vowed to end the reign of his usurping uncle. Jaehaerys was 14 years old, Maegor 36. Jaehaerys had also bonded with the Bronze Fury, Vermithor, and his sister Alysanne, who was 12, bonded with Silverwing. Maegor has only 1 dragon, Lord Rhaegar told the Stormlords. Our prince has 2, and soon 3. When word reached the Red Keep that Jaehaerys was gathering his forces at Storm's End, Rhaena Targaryen mounted Dreamfire and flew to join her brother, abandoning the uncle she had been forced to wed. She took her daughter Arya and the sword Blackfire, which she stole from Maegor as he slept. King Maegor's response was sluggish and confused. He commanded the Grand Maester to send forth ravens, summoning all his loyal lords to gather at King's Landing, only to find that Grand Maester Bennifer had taken ship for Pentos. Finding Princess Arya gone, he sent a rider to Oldtown to demand the head of her twin sister Rhaella, to punish their mother for her betrayal. But Lord Hightower imprisoned his messenger instead. 2 of his Kingsguard vanished one night to go over to Jaehaerys. Lord Balerion of Driftmark was amongst the first to declare for Jaehaerys. As the Valerions were the realm's traditional admirals, Maegor had lost the entire royal fleet. The Tyrells of Highgarden followed, with all the power of the Reach. The Hightowers of Oldtown, the Redwynes of the Arbor, the Lannisters of Castle Rock, the Aarons of the Eyrie, the Royces of Runestone. One by one, they came out against the king. Maegor held the war council all through the night. He had only 4,000 men. The king brooded on the Iron Throne after his lords departed. Hours later, as dawn was breaking, the last of Maegor's queens came seeking after him. Queen Eleanor found Maegor still upon the Iron Throne, pale and dead, his robes soaked through with blood. His arms had been slashed open from wrist to elbow on jagged barbs, and another blade had gone through his neck to emerge beneath his chin. Many believe it was the Iron Throne itself that killed him. Some say it was Queen Eleanor who forced him down onto those blades to avenge the murder of her first husband. The Kingsguard might have done it, though that would have required them to act in concert, as there were 2 knights posted at each door. It might also have been a person or persons unknown, entering and leaving the throne room through some hidden passage. It might also be that the king tasted despair in the dark watches of the night, and took his own life, twisting the blades as needed and opening his veins to spare himself the defeat and disgrace that surely awaited him. However Maegor died on the Iron Throne, his reign of terror finally came to an end after 6 years and 66 days. He was burned in the Red Keep, his ashes laid next to his mother Visenya's and father Aegon the Conqueror's. Jaehaerys I Targaryen ascended the Iron Throne in 48 AC at the age of 14, and would rule the 7 kingdoms for the next 55 years. So let's look back on the life of Maegor the Cruel. Was he mad or insane, like some other Targaryens? Or was he just as his name implies, a cruel, evil man who made all of his evil decisions on his own will? First, if you've heard the phrase, every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin, just know that this is an exaggeration propped up by Game of Thrones.
Every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin.
They say every time a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin, and the world holds its breath.
It is said in the books as well, but just once as an anecdote from Sir Barristan, and it's probably more about a Targaryen's morality, not about a 50-50 gamble on if they're nuts or not. It is, after all, a cool quote, but it's not true, not even a little. In the 400 years since the Targaryens left Valyria, there have been 3 actual insane Targaryens that we know of. Those 3 are Baelor I, who starved himself to death to appease the gods and who locked his sisters in a vault, Prince Rhaegal, a son of Daeron II, who was known to be mad and often danced naked around the Red Keep, and Aerion Brightflame, who became obsessive in his rage and drank a pot of wildfire because he wanted to become a dragon. There is a 4th insane Targaryen, if you want to include the most famous brain-dead king of them all, Aerys II. After all, he became known as the Mad King, for good reason, but his insanity was likely triggered by a traumatic event when he was imprisoned in Duskendale in 277 AC. Before that, he was a bad man and a bad king, but not insane. After Duskendale, he became agoraphobic, stopped all personal hygiene, and became lost in his paranoid mind, and heard voices in his head. Maegor had some good qualities and plenty of bad. He was strong and acted like a true dragon lord when his family was threatened, unlike Aenys. But there were other strong Targaryens, like his successor Jaehaerys, who didn't resort to murdering and torturing people so easily. The way Maegor treated his wives may be his worst quality as a man, since he treated them all like disposable property whose only purpose was to give him a son, and if they failed, it was surely their fault, not his. There is some room for sympathy when it comes to Maegor. His father, Aegon the Conqueror, spent far more attention on his heir Aenys than he did on Maegor during their childhoods. Also, Aenys denied Maegor the ability to take a second wife and seek a son of his own, despite the fact their father practiced polygamy as well. Where other men would bend or break, Maegor stood firm and did as he wished. So by my estimation, Maegor was not a good man, but he was also not quite insane, just evil. He did his family and realm a great service by opposing the conservative fundamentalist Faith Militant, but he also abused his 6 wives and tortured and killed anyone who dared speak against him. Let me know your thoughts on Maegor the Cruel, and whether or not you think he truly was mad. Thanks for watching.